Thank you, Boris. Now, after this beautiful intervention by Jody and her nice visual material, what I will present will be a counterpoint, both in terms of escapism of visual material and of intellectual approach. My presentation will rather be more geometrical than in this flourishing literary way we just heard. So let me define the problem in the terms that it was actually posed this morning by Tamas and Boris. A wonderful description of the status of history today. An early propagator of the end of history, which is a Hegelian topos, was Alexander Kojève, a very interesting person, part of European history in a strong sense. So Alexander Kojève, well, when you declare the end of history, of course you have to specify when and how did it happen. And that's where you have to show your color. So Alexander Kojève admits that for a long time he was oscillating how to define the end of history, whether it happened with Napoleon, as Hegel claims, or maybe, as Kojève would rather claim, with Joseph Stalin. And in both cases, the end of history meant the establishment of universal state, of equality and universal satisfaction, and the end of philosophy, art, and history in Hegelian terms. So, the proof Kojève offered for his secondary hypothesis about Joseph Stalin was that Nazism was defeated. And he said, well, this is the proof that nation-state can no more aspire to become an empire. The nation-state is over, and Soviets are building up now the universal state of equality and universal satisfaction. So, neither Napoleon nor Joseph Stalin actually ended history, and we can ask the question whether Nazism or Nazi-fascism was actually defeated. It certainly was defeated in military terms, but was it defeated politically, ideologically, socially? How doubt it? We can doubt it. And that's why I wrote this book, How Much Fascism? I wrote it out of anger and disbelief on what was happening. It's an intervention text. It's not theoretical. It doesn't meet academic standards, but it's, let's say, sincere. So, what was my impression is that fascism survived in a kind of disseminated way, that it was burning here and there, non-perceived, but still there, and that from moment to moment it can coalesce. It can coalesce and break out in ways that cannot be anticipated. So I think that in many post-socialist countries, and especially in the territory in the region of Yugoslavia, such a coalescence happened. Such a coalescence I would name neo-fascism. Now, my present task, what I would like to do today with you, is to reflect what authorizes us, or are we authorized to use this horrible term fascism for events that occur nowadays. So my reflection is about historical fascism, about what we call neo-fascism, which is, this kind of marginal, violent, not so marginal, politically articulated, but still not majority movements and groups. And can we speak about post-fascism? The first time I heard about post-fascism was a colleague of ours, Tonči Kuzmanić, who said, well, Berlusconi is post-fascist. He doesn't have problem with human rights. He doesn't have a problem with Holocaust, and he can apologize for anti-Semitism and pogroms, but he basically is a post-fascist. So the question is, what are the features that authorize us to use the expression fascism? So, these are the three problems of our reflection. Now, on a very abstract level, I went back to the classical theories and I combined them. So the lesson from the classical theories of fascism, from the 13th, from the Comintern, from the labor movement during the war, Clara Zetkin, Dimitrov, and Zonretl, that it is a conjunction of two heterogeneous and originally independent processes. The class recomposition of national bourgeoisie from a historical position of weakness, of structural weakness, and on the other side, from beneath, a class decomposition of, well, I'm using this working masses because I don't have a better expression, but Jody used it too, so maybe it's already legitimate to use it. It's now langage legal. So the class decomposition of the working masses under the hegemony of bourgeois ideology, specifically hardcore nationalism and racism. In neo-fascism and in post-socialism, we also we look for such a conjuncture. In post-socialism, it was actually evident. It was sociologically proved. Sociologically, in Hungary, people were doing this research. What was the difference between the elites under socialism and the new elites under democracy? And basically, the calculus was that 80% of the new democratic elites are the old socialist elites. And I have a nasty remark to that the 20% of the new elites are due to generational renewal, because in times of quick, fast change, generational promotion goes faster. So basically, we should speak about rearticulation of former ruling coalitions, which were not homogeneous anyway. We should not have this kind of romantic view of socialism as a, we should not accept the official Communist Party theory about monolithic party ruling, representing the working masses. It was a coalition of different groups, and they rearticulated them, they recomposed themselves into national bourgeoisies, or at least this seems to have been the project. On the other hand, labor movements were disorganized in several ways, even in countries where they used to be strong, like Poland, or even in some parts, in parts of Yugoslavia. Now, my theory about post-socialism is that it has analogous processes than the classical fascism. In classical fascism, according to Zonret's very subtle theory. It was the weaker part of German bourgeoisie that supported Hitler and his party. Why? Because it was heavy metal industry, Thyssen and company, they were non-competitive on international markets. So they were interested to have an internal market, a national economy, and to have a demand for those values which Zondereder calls non-reproductive values. For those values that do not actually enter into the reproduction of capital, which simply put means armament industry. State commands, state demand of heavy metal, of armament industry within a national economy. The result of this operation in Nazi Germany was heavy increase of exploitation of labor. And the introduction of archaic ways of exploitation, which means intensification of labor, longer working hours, which means more surplus value without technical innovation, without increasing productivity of labor. So, what I want to retain from this analysis is the weak national bourgeoisie, which is internationally non-competitive and is based on technologically stagnating industries. And I think this describes post Eastern Europe, socialist Eastern Europe quite well. So there was the project of ruling coalitions to reorganize them, to rearticulate, to recompose them into national bourgeoisies and in a capitalist mode of production from a position of structural weakness. Now, this attempt was not isolated. It was happening already in a period of expansion of a new type of capitalism which started in the 70s and was politically came to power with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and it was already in this global offensive, this new type of capitalism. So besides, there was intensive political and military pressure upon post-socialist countries in European Union, evidently, and NATO, and economic pressure, since International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and World Trade Organization were at that moment already adopted neoliberal policies. They were not meant to, but you know, with penetration of liberal economists and administrators, they were already turned into an avant-garde of neoliberal offensive. So this project of formation of national bourgeoisies in Eastern Europe, in post-socialist countries, was, we can say, doomed to fail. At least doomed to fail in the majority of countries, with the possible exception of Russia and, of course, China. So, but we are not concerned with that. What we are concerned with is that the whole neoliberal project is actually already a project launched by Euro-Atlantic core of the capitalist system. I'm using Euro-Atlantic because it's part of the jargon. I'm meaning, the meaning is Western Europe, Canada, USA, which means the core hegemonic, the hegemonic core of world capitalist system, which is losing its grip right now, which is already in the defensive against the emerging Pacific and India powers, which means China, the Tigers, and India, of course. So what happened was that those new national bourgeoisies to be were caught into a movement where the expansion that was integrating them and was fighting against the project of national bourgeoisie was already a bourgeoisie fighting from a weaker structural position within the world system. You know, Euro-Atlantic fraction of capitalist class, world capitalist class of bourgeoisie, who is losing its strength, well expanded into post-socialist countries and frustrated the formation of national economies and national bourgeoisies. So on the other side, labor movement was disorganized in these countries in several ways. I would say that the most important was institutional restoration of capitalist relations of production, of capitalist institutions, especially market of labor power. Of course, it undermined worker solidarity very fast. Trade unions are still losing their power. If you look at well, I don't have the statistics. I could have, but I started preparing this paper too late. Membership of the labor unions is decreasing everywhere, west and east, and it's parallel with the disappearance of traditional industries. So trade unions have not found a formula how to organize the precarious workers and all those masses of people, now already in majority, who don't have so-called standard labor relations. And it's ironic that sociology, industrial sociology, still uses this term standard employment relations, even though they are like 30%. And they are not standard anymore. So that was, I think, this was this institutional blow. It was objective. It was not a kind of conscientious political complot, conspiracy. Yeah, exactly. It was when you introduce this, you destroy labor movement. And you maybe remember Communist Manifesto, where it says, well, factory is still the place where workers come together. Nowadays, factories are disappearing. No more factories. It's subcontracting, outsourcing system, which means family, small and medium enterprises, family enterprises, ethnic business, which are running on something, on pre-capitalist principles of exploitation. Family solidarity, ethnic solidarity, when, you know how outsourcing enterprise works. It's linked to a big corporation, and the big corporation says, next Monday, so many pieces of this at this point. So the father says, well, you're not going to disco, no weekend, we are working. And you don't, yeah, you know, if the father says that mother works, children won't go to disco, they will work. And that's you know, that's the official line of European Union. Small and medium enterprises will save us. Of course will save us, because they produce extra profit with pre-capitalist mechanisms. And basically, the classical, the historical fascism occurred when this extra profit was no more accessible to certain parts of capitalist economy. So it had to use other measures like national unity and police terror, civil police, etc. I mean, you know, Massenpsychologie des Fascismus is only half part of the story. The other part of the story is called Gestapo. Here we have the same situation. We have the situation of uncompetitive local industries, problem with capital accumulation, and necessity to introduce non-capitalist or pre-capitalist is very optimistically said, non-capitalist modes of domination that yield surplus exploitation. So, but as I said, this project is this national project of post-socialist elites or new ruling, dominating coalitions is anachronistic, and it of course exasperates the ruling class. On the other hand, labor movement has been destroyed, and you have those periodical emergences of neo-fascism, which is basically very close to the classical historical fascism, but it mostly occurs in moments of marginalization. Why is National Front so popular in France? Because France is losing its not only France is part of Euro-Atlantic capitalism, which is now weakening. It is losing its competition with Germany. It basically, if you ask economists, they say, well, France, it's more or less the same thing as Portugal and Spain structurally. So, now, I think that this post-socialist neo-fascisms and historical fascisms can be explained quite simply in terms of structural analogy, not literal analogy, but structural analogy, which means classical composition of national bourgeoisie, here rearticulation of former ruling coalitions into national bourgeoisies from above, from beneath, class decomposition, the so-called defeat of the working class by Clara Zetkin, this pathetic old communist jargon, and here labor movements disorganized under institutional pressures and also ideological hegemony, which was terribly right-wing, terribly bourgeois in the post-communist, post-socialist situations. Now, post-fascism is a harder question. I would illustrate it with one of my first reflections where I thought about fascism. You know that Nazis were burning the books. Now, liberals prevent the books to be published. No, they prevent precisely those books that otherwise would have to be burned. So you have this romantic German approach, which is spectacular but inefficient, burning the books, and you have the rational, administrative, and very efficient liberal approach. You commercialize publishing and call it publishing industry. Fine, and everything that will be published, even if books like those you can see here around get to be published, they don't get distribution because the distribution is monopolized by the great publishing firms. So my theory about post-fascism is that actually European Union and neoliberal politics are containing the development of fascism by new ways how to achieve the same goals. For instance, let's take Greece. The debt crisis is an ingenious way how to transform fictive capital, financial fictive capital in the banks, into real capital taken from the Greek people. You know, it's ingenious. It's the state. It's according to the state of law. Contracts have to pacta sunt servanda. Contracts have to be honored. But you actually transform the speculative capital that was produced on stock exchange with so-called inventive new financial instruments into the real one by recycling it through a country. And the whole country is working for this transformation. So by the constraints of legal instruments, the state of law, plus inventive economic and juridical political arrangements, you can achieve the same goal, capital accumulation, under the conditions of decline of Euro-Atlantic capitalism. One of the disciplinary practices of European Union, which is actually to be under the conditions, which is actually positive, is that they are controlling and disciplining national bourgeoisies and transforming them into subordinated fraction of the world bourgeoisie. If you look at all those post-socialist governments, they go to Brussels, they get their directives from the commissars, and they come home and they make these directions, or even informal directions, being voted in the parliaments. You know, they don't even dare to go to Moscow to celebrate the end of the World War II. Like 40 years, or no, 50 years ago now, André Gunder Frank proposed the term Lumpenbourgeoisie for comprador bourgeoisie. I think this is nowadays it's maybe not applicable, because these fractions of bourgeoisie are much more integrated than those local dictators in Latin America about whom Gunder Frank was speaking. So I will stop. This is this organization of working people, and this is the situation in colors. This is the traditional Fordist situation. You have homogenization of the field of labor, which means strong trade unions and national culture, national state. Now you have disintegration, fragmentation, and identity cultures, which means struggle for recognition, not for labor rights. Thank you.